Welcome to ACC Nation, featuring sports news and special guest interviews. Here's Will Ojanen and Jim Quist.
This is ACC Nation's Duke football preview with the publisher of the rival site Devils Illustrated, where he covers football, basketball, recruiting, and a whole lot more. Sharing his thoughts on the 2024 version of the Blue Devils is our special guest, Connor O'Neill. Thanks for joining us, Connor.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Will?
All right, so I want to get into the something off field first, because one of the things I've seen before we get into the coaching changes, I've seen they've done some upgrades to Wallace Wade, and today it was announced that they added something called the Devil's Deck. Could you provide a little insight on that?
Yeah, you have to forgive me because it's fresh in my mind, and it's a little fuzzy because it's just out there, but I think I saw somebody compare it to what NC State has behind one of their end zones, where they've got it almost looks like a temporary structure, but it's kind of a party deck type of thing. I think Duke's rendering had an area for lawn games, which I assume is more your cornhole than like what's the game with the bocce ball? Like I always just think of the game that they have at the nice grass courts at Pinehurst that don't have anything to do with golf. It's the only thing at Pinehurst that doesn't have to do anything with golf.
Bocce's good enough. That's and stuff.
Yeah, maybe is croquet? Would that be?
Yeah, croquet, bocce.
Yeah. So I don't think that's gonna be like save your hoity-toity Duke jokes for that. I think it's gonna be more cornhole bags for those who want to argue about what name we call that game, but that kind of like, I think there's a bar too. It looks like just kind of, I don't want to say your run-of-the-mill way to spruce up a game day atmosphere, but it seems like it's that type of idea that everybody is kind of looking for, unless you're Georgia or Alabama or Tennessee, or everybody's kind of trying to figure out how to entice people to still come to games when it's a lot cheaper to watch them at home, right? The one thing I do think is interesting that's kind of been lost in the excitement about it is it takes Duke's capacity from 40,000 to about 35,000.
Right.
Which, if I'm not mistaken, makes them one of the lowest Power Four. I got to get used to saying that, but one of the lowest Power Four stadium capacities in the country. I know it's not the lowest because I also cover Wake Forest, and I know they're at like 31.5 in their home stadium. So it takes the capacity down. I'm sure it'll be worth it if they can get people in there, and if you win, then people show up and you can fill out however many seats that you have.
As an aside, if I tried saying cornhole here in my neck of the woods, nobody would know what I'm talking about. But
is it bags up there?
I think so. It's like the soda pop thing, we say pop up here.
Yep.
But anyways, let's get into the on-field stuff. Or at least we have a new coach. Manny Diaz comes in after I would say he got treated terribly at Miami, and I'm glad he's getting another opportunity. And honestly, I feel like this is a great landing spot for him.
Yeah, I think so. He, like you said, he got the short end of the stick in Miami. I think you don't even have to hear that from him. You can hear it from people who were at Miami when it happened. You kind of hesitate to call it a career rejuvenation because, like you said, like we've said, he wasn't that bad at Miami. It didn't really warrant a firing in the way that they went about it. But he really did some great stuff at Penn State the last 2 years with their defense. And so you kind of knew he was going to get another shot at being a head coach. I think his record in 3 years at Miami was something like 24-16. Something in that neck of the woods. But, it's a good spot for him to land. It's a good coach for Duke to have. Has the ACC experience, has the pretty decent pedigree coming from Penn State, being a head coach before. You've got an added bonus where One of the biggest things that people talk about with Manny Diaz taking the Duke job was his strength and conditioning coach at Miami, David Feely, is very much renowned in college football circles. He's picked up a couple like strength and conditioning coach of the year national awards in the last few months. He, because Mario Cristobal, when he was hired, brought his own guy from Oregon, David was out of a job. So Mike Elko was pretty smart and hired David Feely. And that's a big reason why Duke had the quick turnaround that they had to win, 16 or 17 games over the last 2 years. So Mike Elko goes to Texas A&M, and there were actually initial reports out there that like David Feely was leaving to go to Texas A&M. All of a sudden, Duke hires Manny Diaz, the guy who hired him to be Miami's strength and conditioning coordinator. And so Duke was able to hang on to David Feely. And that's kind of, you're going to sometimes when you guys know, anybody that follows college football knows, a lot of times when you have a new coach, the new coach comes in and talks about how he has to build the new culture and he's got to do all this shifting of philosophies, and they don't have to do that at Duke. And a lot of that has to do with the building blocks that David Feely's already been putting into the program for the last 2 years.
I was kind of fascinated looking at the quarterback situation that Coach Diaz brought both Malik Murphy and Grayson Loftus to media days. Now, we know Murphy is the highly touted one coming from Texas. He was kind of in a numbers crunch, obviously, with Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning. But I feel like doing that kind of says, hey, this isn't necessarily Malik's job. Is that the case?
So I'll be careful here. Duke really wants it to be a quarterback competition. Like Duke does not want the appearance or illusion that the job has just been handed to Malik Murphy and they've got to go through the bells and whistles of calling it a quarterback battle, but giving Malik Murphy the vast majority of first team reps. That's not what they've said. Practice will start. Here we are recording this on a Monday night. Practice starts in, I don't know, I think about 13 and a half hours from when I'm saying this right now. So we'll see what happens when it's actually out there. But for all intents and purposes, they want it to be both of you guys have an equal shot at winning the job. Honestly, in the spring, there were moments where Malik Murphy looked like he was going to be, I saw this comparison in the summer, so it's kind of fresh in my mind. He might be another Anthony Richardson, where he gets in there and he's so toolsy and can make all of the throws and then some that the NFL teams will salivate about, and has the arm strength and that kind of build that they can really buy into spending a high draft pick on him. There were other times that it looked like Grayson Loftus was the best quarterback on the roster in the spring, right? Like he can do a little more with mobility. Malik Murphy is not a runner. He is a pocket passer. So my opinion is I don't think Malik Murphy was brought to Durham to be a backup quarterback. I will hold on to that opinion until if I see a few practices and it changes my mind, I'm not going to say that I'm going to hold on to that belief until the opener. But that's going to be my thought process moving forward until proven otherwise.
The running back room is interesting. Obviously, you have Jaquez Moore running back coming back, but there's some depth in there. But from reading some stuff from I get the sense you really like this running back room.
I really like the first two. I think Jaquez Moore is very good. I don't know if you can really count on many running backs in college football to have 1,000-yard seasons because they're all in such timeshares now, unless you just have an absolute horse like Omari and Hampton. But I really think Jaquez Moore is going to have a good season. I'm a huge fan of Peyton Jones. He was a freshman last year, and you go into the season thinking that you're going to need 4 running backs, and he was the 4th running back in the pecking order when all of them were healthy. And Duke just kind of stayed healthy, which is what you want out of that position. But it meant that Peyton Jones didn't really get to show as much during the season as we saw from him in fall camp. So I think as long as his progression has continued, which in the spring it looked like it had, he's going to be one of the breakout young stars of maybe not the ACC, but like this neck of the woods in the ACC. When you're thinking about the teams that are not expected to compete for the ACC championship, if you get what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. So this
Past
receiver,
those, oh,
sorry,
I'm sorry.
I was just going
Past
to
those
bring up the
two,
receiver room. Sorry.
yeah, no, I was just to add past Jaquez Moore and Peyton Jones. I don't know. They've got to find some answers there. They've got a couple transfers in. They're both. I think they both have the same build, and it's like 5'10", 225 in that range. Like they've got some bowling ball builds to them. So we'll see how they shake out here in the next like few weeks that we get to see them.
This receiver room, I say it's got some depth to. I would say I don't know if I would call it depth, but there's definitely some experience there. Plus, with Jordan Moore and Samir Higgins. Plus, you got Eli Panko back after missing the whole season. But what's the depth like there? Because I don't really know a lot about the people behind them.
They need guys to step up behind them. I mean, I think you know what Jordan Moore is going to be. I thought Samir Higgins was due for a bit of a breakout season, and he, you know, through some of his own doing and some not. Duke was a really good rushing team last year, so some of the receivers didn't really have the numbers that I thought they would have going into the year. Samir Higgins is a little disappointing last year to me. Eli Panko coming back, I think they missed him a little more than I gave them credence to in going into the season. He's a good deep ball threat. He's a big bodied receiver, but they've got to get some guys behind them. Spencer Jones redshirted last year. He's a huge body. They've got a really small and quick receiver named Sean Brown, who's actually from just down the road from me in Kernersville. Shout out to East Forsyth High School. I think he's on the come up. Just looking to get a shot. They've got another one that's a little bit like Sean Brown named Karan Boyd. I think he's actually listed as a running back on the roster, but I think they're going to move him all around. At least that was the plan with the previous staff, and I think it's not that much of a deviation for the plan with him, whether sometimes he'll take snaps in the backfield and take a direct handoff, other times he'll motion out and be able to get a mismatch on a safety or a linebacker or something like that and be able to turn on the jets and go past them. So those are kind of the guys I'd have my eye on. I'm not sure if there's anybody in the freshman class that I trust enough to say they're going to come in and make an immediate impact. I don't know about that yet.
Given all the newness on the offensive line, they're just loaded up on grad transfers in the portal. Is this a situation where we're really not going to know the best line until we get into the season a bit?
Oh, I can tell you, I have no idea what it looks like right now. And like I said, we're 13 hours away from them starting camp. I've never seen a spring game like I did for Duke back in the spring when they had 5 offensive linemen, and so they could play 11. They could play 11 on 11 when one group of the offense was out on the field. Otherwise, they had to play 7 on 7, and the defensive line could only take like 2 or 3 steps forward, and then they just had to stand there. It's a complete, remodel, makeover, wholesale transition. Like it adds much of one of those as possible without Deion Sanders being your coach. That's what Duke has on their offensive line right now.
A little disconcerting. When you talk about Murphy being a pocket passer, and if he is going to be the guy who starts for the Dukes, then this offensive line, this question that you just presented to everyone, wow, that's worrisome. You want to go a little further into that and talk about some of these transfers that maybe will be able to step up and fill these spots that were basically savaged by graduation in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean it's not like they lack bodies now. In the spring they lack bodies, but that was just a numbers game of who they could get onto campus and who they had to wait for to enroll in the last couple months. Um, I mean I think they have four good tackles to choose from. Uh, One of them was on the team last year, Brian Parker the second. He actually started it. That's the little trivia question if you want to make it a trivia question. He started for Graham Barton in the game against Notre Dame. Graham Barton's a first round pick. I believe he was a first round pick of the Bucks. Um, he's got the experience. I think he's good enough. James Pogerelk, I think is how you say it, comes over from Stanford, so he's a little intra ACC transfer.
Yes.
Zachary Franks is a huge body coming from Northwestern, and the other one I think is Bruno Fina, whose dad was, I believe the name was John Fina for the Bills back in the 80s and 90s. Um, so they've got any offensive line coach will tell you they need more than two tackles. You want to have three, and if you can get a fourth, that's a luxury. So I think Duke has four tackles to choose from. The other good returner they have is Justin Pickett. He has played a lot on the interior the last 2 years. I would pencil him in to start at one of the guard positions. And then the one thing that you can really count on with Duke over the last 2 years that I think is going to continue because of what I talked about with David Feely is they've been able to bring in these offensive linemen from the Ivy League that, they distinguish themselves in the Ivy League, but you're used to saying, okay, well, that's FCS football. You're not going to get offensive linemen from the FCS that are able to just come in and play really good football for an ACC school. They've done it the last 2 years because you kind of, it's tough to say, but you get guys that have had not the greatest facilities, not the greatest support staffs in the world, and you give them enhancements in all those areas, they can get bigger and stronger and faster a lot quicker than if they stayed at their schools. So that's where Duke has had a lot of success in that range, and they've got a few Ivy Leaguers coming in on the interior. Some of the names escape me. I think one of them is Eric Shawn. One of them's Mike Barr. I think Mike Barr is the one that they like at center. And it's not just Ivy League. Like it's Patriot League. It's guys from that level of football that you wouldn't expect to look at and say, oh yeah, this guy from Lafayette, he's going to be a real difference maker on the offensive line. But that's what they've done over the last 2 years, and it's a new staff. So if there's doubt there, it's warranted. I just think that the track record with what Duke has been able to do is there to trust that they're going to get some guys that fit really well at Duke and do what they need to do.
It's a thing to remember that most of us forget conveniently is that there's only so many slots available at FBS schools. And some of these kids are going to fall through and they'll end up at FCS schools, put a little time in, get recognition. And these are the people that you're talking about, Connor. There are a lot of players out there that can make that transition. And as you said, if they have the right staff, it'll make a big difference. Quick question for you before I go back to Will. Manny Diaz coming into Duke. What is, now that you've had a little bit of time and you've heard other people talk, including media people, what's the overall impression of Manny Diaz taking over the Duke football program?
I think it's pretty favorable at this point. It's a fit that, maybe is not obvious, but when it's presented back in December when they were going through the coaching search, it makes a lot of sense. Mike Elko was successful. He was a high-level defensive coordinator. Okay, he leaves, go get a high-level defensive coordinator.
Yeah.
As I mentioned before, like it's a step up that you got that type of person, and he's been a head coach before. Mike Elko had never been a head coach before. Look, I mean, Duke is realistic. Duke didn't think they were going to go out and hire uh, the next Kirby Smart or the next Nick Saban. If Manny Diaz works out like that, and Manny Diaz wins 5 national championships at Duke and is there for 25 years, then great. That's wonderful for Duke. But you get what I'm saying? That like there's realistic expectations here, and you can talk about all the cliches about the standard being excellent, and yeah, it all sounds good, but it's also based in reality of Duke has a long way to go to climb the mountain. You don't know if Manny Diaz is the coach who's going to get them to the mountaintop or if they'll ever get to the mountaintop. But what you do know is they've got a good fit, and they've got somebody that if they support him and he's loyal to them, then they think that they can continue progressing in whatever this world of college football that has been created now.
That's a good way of putting that. Hey, just in case anybody wanted to know, I understand that Urban Meyer was available also. So, Will, it's yours.
Oh God, Urban Meyer. I don't know if I can. Anyways, so let's look at the defense real quick. And obviously, you're going from a defensive-minded coach to another defensive-minded coach. Is there going to be much of a philosophy change defensively?
I think there is, just based on kind of the things Manny talks about. And I'm saying that not really having been around him as much as I would have liked to be in the last few months. I think there's more of an emphasis on creating negative plays and playing aggressively. Not to say that the preface here is so important, not to say that Mike Elko's defense just sat back in rush 3, cover 8 for the duration of games. They were certainly aggressive. I think there's just going to be a little more emphasis on creating negative plays, creating turnover plays. I think that's going to lead to some bigger plays. Sometimes you might give up that 60-yard touchdown because you left somebody on an island and there was, a mismatch or something like that. And that's what defensive football is. It's taking away 2 things and leaving a third thing exposed. So I think that you'll see a little higher TFLs for linebackers and safeties. I think the points per game also might rise a little bit with that.
So looking at some of the things, I feels like the name that is a name that doesn't get out there a lot, but Trey Freeman looks like somebody who could be a very big piece of this defense. I honestly watched quite a few Duke games last year, but don't even remember. What can you tell me about Trey Freeman?
It's funny. He's a hometown guy. And I remember the spring game in 22 I think that was after his freshman year, after he'd redshirted and not played any for a team that was 3-9 and winless in the ACC in 2021.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a great spring game. And I remember we talked to him after that spring game. His family was all around. His mom was telling us, "Yep, that's my baby. You're going to be talking to him a lot. Number 12." So I went into 2022 thinking, Trey Freeman, like that's a name to watch. Well, I'll need to figure out where he is in the linebacker pecking order. He could be a starter by the end of the season. And then, Shaka Hayward had a great season in 2022 at middle linebacker. He was very durable also. Shaka Hayward missed the bowl game, the military bowl against UCF. He did not play. And all of a sudden, there's Trey Freeman. I think he led Duke in tackles in that military bowl. And it was kind of like, okay, I was just 12 games late, but I was on the Trey Freeman bandwagon. And so I was able to kind of bang the drum going into last year of like, hey, this guy is going to be a difference maker. He's going to be really good in the middle of the defense. To be a good defense, this comes over from baseball and watching how my Baltimore Orioles have been built. To be good at defense in any sport, you have to be strong in the middle. And so Duke has been for the last 2 years with the defensive tackles they had in Dwayne Carter, Jamion Franklin, and Aeneas Peebles. And then with middle linebackers, Shaka Hayward and Trey Freeman. And with the safeties they've had, Darius Joyner, Jalen Stinson, Terry Moore a little bit last year, they're really good up the middle. And so it's really important that Trey Freeman is back because they're missing the pieces at defensive tackle. And they have Jalen Stinson back. Terry Moore is back, but we'll see what the rest of the secondary holds up.
Yeah, obviously a lot of games are won in the trenches, and I'll be honest with you, like this, I feel like this Duke defensive line's a bit of a question mark just because there was a lot of attrition at that position after last season. Where do things stand there?
No, I look at it from two viewpoints, and neither one of them is very favorable going into the season. Number one, you lose so much production. Dwayne Carter was so valuable to this team for 3 years. Jamion Franklin transferred in from Notre Dame and was an immediate difference maker. Aeneas Peebles didn't even start last year, and he was one of the most coveted defensive tackles in the portal and is going to be playing Duke later in the season with Virginia Tech. RJ Oben was a decent edge rusher, and he was decent enough to the point that Notre Dame didn't just want Riley Leonard. They wound up with RJ Oben also. So you're talking about 4 premier players on the defensive line. And I tend to think it's tough for teams like Georgia and Alabama and Clemson to replace 4 difference makers on the defensive line going from one season to the next. It's even harder to do it at a place like Duke, where you maybe don't have that pipeline of the talent to come through year in and year out. So, look, I think that Wesley Williams is going to be really good. He stepped up last year and was one of the breakout players on the team. I think they're kind of waiting on Vincent Anthony Jr. He's played a lot in his first 2 years. He's needed to gain weight. Each of those 2 years, he gets moved off the ball way too easily. They brought in a transfer from Liberty, Kendi Charles, who they're hoping for big things in the middle at defensive tackle. But yeah, there's a lot of question marks on that defensive line, and I don't think we're going to have the answers to them until that what you were talking about with offensive line. I think we're not going to have the answers of who the difference makers are on the defensive line until a couple games into the season.
I'm going to jump into the schedule because arguably I don't think they have a challenge until week 5 when they play North Carolina, which is, I mean, you can look at it one way or the other on week 5, whether you think North Carolina is going to be a challenge or not. But then thereafter, it becomes the grind of the ACC. So is it advantageous to have those 5 weeks of, I'm not going to say they're cupcakes, but cruising, a little bit, getting up to speed? Is that going to be a good thing with this team based upon everything that we're hearing from you? And then, will they be ready? Hopefully, after 5 weeks of play, they will be to take on that grind.
I got to put eyes in the back of my head because I got my schedules behind me here. I actually kind of disagree. I think week 2 at Northwestern in a stadium that holds maybe 12 or 15,000 is going to be a weird atmosphere. It's a 9:00 Eastern start. So you run into that kind of weirdness of is the East Coast team ready to play a game that starts at 9 on their biological clock or whatever. I think that's a little bit of a trap game and a tricky game. The last time Duke went to Northwestern 2 years ago, they had to stop was it a 2-point conversion or a touchdown or something? They had to get a play at the goal line to win the game in the last couple seconds. But I do see your point. Like it's easier to see Duke getting off to a 4-0 start than it is like a 3-1 or 2-2 start. So I do think there's going to be a little bit more of a proving ground when you step into that first game against Carolina, that ACC opener. Actually, I did a story in the past month or so about I think the Carolina game is probably the most important game on Duke's schedule. It's kind of the first marquee game for Manny Diaz as Duke's coach. They haven't beaten Carolina the last 4 years, and the last two have come in painfully excruciating fashion. I mean, just I don't want to come on here and complain about referees. We already talked about refs when I came on in the summer and talked about
that's okay. We can do it because honestly, they have been building up cachet and they deserve it. So
yeah, so like it's just hurt. The one thing the last time Duke beat Carolina, Daniel Jones was their starting quarterback. Like that's the kicker, right? Like you see Will's eyes kind of bugging out. Like, yeah, it's been that long, and so that's the one to keep an eye on. I mean, we're not on the team; we can talk about it. That's the one that I want to see to kind of really provide a measuring stick of where this team will be this year.
So, if I go to that game, I'm going to be up there playing cornhole and drinking Merlot. So just and I'll tune in every once in a while just to see how the game's going.
Just make sure you're paying attention in like the third and fourth quarter, because these last 2 years that they've played Carolina, it's been back and forth. It's been some of the best football that I've seen over the last few years.
Now I'm making light, obviously, of Duke, North Carolina, and Virginia all have this sort of wine and cheese crowd going on. Whether there's truth to that, who knows? What do you think? What do you think about the end result of this season? Is this a team that hits a bowl?
I think bowl is somewhere between a toss-up and kind of likely. I don't think there's any illusion, like I used that word already, but I don't think there's any premise that this team should compete for an ACC championship.
Right.
If they do, then great. Then, we're going to be talking about Duke's first-year coach winning ACC Coach of the Year for the second time in 3 years. That will just be the case if he's in the ACC championship game or just comes up a game or two short. But what I think the realistic goal is and should be is throw out the records, just maintain the positive trajectory that's been established over the last 2 years. Just keep the thing moving in the right direction. Don't get wayward. Don't sidetrack. Don't, take a step backward, because that would hurt Duke.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that. It should be obvious, especially with how much uncertainty there is with the ACC, with the TV contracts, all the exasperating stuff that exists in the periphery when we actually start playing games. Like, you don't want to be going into that in the off season after a 4-8 year. So based on what Duke has done and based on that just dark cloud looming over any college football team that isn't one of the blue bloods, I think it's really important to at least have the 7-5 season with a bowl game, 6-6 season to sneak into a bowl game. Who cares if it was a pre-Christmas game in somewhere that, had little fanfare? You want those as opposed to the alternatives.
Right. Exposure is great for recruiting, and there's money in your wallet. So,
be good enough that you can be on the same sideline as a Pop-Tart.
It's the second Pop-Tart Bowl reference I've had today. Spread out over about 12 hours. So
sorry, beats the hell out of having mayonnaise dumped on you. So
God, yeah.
Yeah. If I was the head coach and I won that bowl, I would make my assistants draw straws for that one.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. Your contract depends on that. Anyway, Will, you want to wrap up with anything?
I think we covered it. I think my just sort of overall thing is I feel like a bowl is a good step for this season, and anything else is a bonus.
Yep. So looks good. I mean, for the most part, you're talking about when you're starting out and you've lost all these players, and then it's a rebuild to some degree. And I think it's going to be a lot quicker with Manny Diaz at the helm. I think he's, as you guys have discussed earlier, I think this is somebody that is an ideal coach for Duke. And I think is going to, as you're pointing out, Connor, you want to continue building and moving forward. And I think this is the guy to do it. So, get out there and play some cornhole and watch some football, man. What can I say? So it's all good.
It'd be nice if they had a media day for us and they just let us hang out there for like an hour or so.
Yep.
I think that needs to be pushed. In fact, we're pushing it here right now.
Yep.
For those who are, listening.
Hey, MSP is 15 minutes for me. I can get there in no time.
No problem.
I mean, we don't get to play golf at the ACC media day anymore, so why not at least give us a media day at these stadiums to play some cornhole?
Right. That's right.
Just BS. All right.
Yeah. You're not missing the golf, brother. Okay. Our ACC Nation Duke football preview of the publisher of the Rival Side Devils Illustrated. Our special guest, Connor O'Neill. Thank you, sir, for joining us and providing a great look at the 2020 version of the Blue Devils.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it, Connor.
Thanks for listening to ACC Nation. Be sure to listen, like and subscribe to our podcast, radio, and YouTube channels by visiting accnation.net. Follow us on Instagram, X, Facebook, Mastodon, Threads, Blue Sky and Reddit at ACC Nation.
ACC Nation.